Hello everybody, I'm Mrs. Irlu and today we're going to learn a little history. First, we'll talk about the day that you were born. On the day that you were born, your mother cradled you in her arms and the nurse came by and she recorded some information. She recorded your name and your parents' names and the place where you were born and the day and the time and maybe even how much you weighed when you were born. And all this information was recorded on your birth certificate. This is my birth certificate. It has my name and my parents' names. It says that I was born in Nyack, New York. This is my daughter's birth certificate. She was born in Gallup, New Mexico. Maybe you were too. So the day that you were born is a little piece of history. History is the story of the world, and it's the story of what happened, where, and when, and you're part of the story. History is the story of the world and everything written down and recorded about the history of the world. But many thousands of years ago, people didn't have writing, and so we call that time before history or prehistory. And during prehistoric times, we know that people sometimes lived in caves. We know that they knew how to make tools. They used tools to go hunting. They made bows and arrows. They had language and they talked to each other so they could share stories with each other. But because they didn't have writing in prehistory, they didn't write down stories that we can read today. They didn't write down or record events about their lives. So we can still learn about their lives because maybe we can find beads, or you might find in a cave, we might find even paintings of animals, but we don't find words and stories. But about 3,500 years ago, people invented writing. They started writing and recording things. So we're going to travel today to a place called Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers. So we'll start in our home. Here's North America. We live out west in New Mexico, so to get to Mesopotamia, we have to go all the way across the United States and North America, and across the Atlantic Ocean, and then across the Mediterranean Sea, until we get to Mesopotamia. Now, this map doesn't show the rivers, this globe doesn't show the rivers very well, but if we were in an airplane, as we got closer to Mesopotamia and we looked out the airplane window, it might look like this. So here, this blue is the Mediterranean Sea, and as we go east across the Mediterranean Sea, we come to Mesopotamia. These long lines are the rivers. The rivers flow into the Persian Gulf and the ocean, and this land between the rivers is called Mesopotamia. And the people who lived there about 3,500 years ago are the first people who started recording and writing about their lives. So that is our map. And let me show you one more thing about our map. This green area represents places where people settled and did farming, raised animals, grew wheat. And they did that because the flood waters from the rivers gave them the water they needed to live that way. And you notice it's shaped a little bit like a moon, like a crescent moon? Sometimes this area is called the Fertile Crescent. That means the crescent-shaped land where you can grow crops and raise animals. So the rivers supported life because water supports life. The rivers allowed people to get water for drinking, water to raise crops, water for their animals. People could also travel up and down the river and trade goods. And people also used the water mixed with earth to make bricks and build homes. And in addition to building homes, in ancient Mesopotamia, people built these very tall, almost skyscraper-like buildings called ziggurats. This shows one of those towers, And here's another picture of a ziggurat. So down here are people, they're just little specks. So if you ever think of the tallest building in Albuquerque, and that would give you a feeling for what these ziggurats were like. They had tall staircases, and at the very top, there were people called priests would study the stars, the movement of the stars and planets. And they were especially interested in the planets. Planets look like stars, but they don't have their own light. They reflect the light of our sun. And because they move around the sun, the planets have a different path in the sky compared to the stars. So in the land between the rivers, the ancient Mesopotamians wondered about that, and they recorded that. They wrote about the movement of the stars and the planets. They wrote about it. Remember, they're the first people to use writing. Their writing looked different from ours. It looked something like this, and we call it cuneiform. They didn't have paper. They didn't have pencils. They used clay. They took clay and they took reeds. Reeds are these tall, sturdy grasses that you can let dry out, and then you can, it's kind of like having a pencil that's not sharpened, and then, or a pencil without lead. And they made scratches in the clay, and each scratch had a special meaning, just like each of our letters has a special meaning or significance. Or our letters represent sounds. So their writing was different from ours, but it was used to communicate thoughts and ideas. In fact, their first writing, the first cuneiform, was used to record agreements. So I brought some clay, and this is my pretend reed. And I'm going to make some scratches. Now let's imagine that you have 3 goats and I want to buy your goats. But you want to make sure that I pay you, and I'm a baker, so you say, well, I'll give you 3 goats if you promise to give me 100 loaves of bread. So I say, okay, I'll take the goats, I'll give you 100 loaves of bread. But you want to make sure you get your bread, so we write it down. We write, Andy gave me 3 goats, I'm going to give him 100 loaves of bread. And that way, if I forget, you can remind me. We have an agreement, and we wrote it down. So the first writing was used to record agreements. And that's still an important reason for writing today. Let's see, if we could go to Mesopotamia, what else might we want to visit? Let's see, the ziggurats are still there, but they've collapsed. They're big piles, mostly piles of rubble. They're not as tall as they used to be, but they're still there. But if we could time travel, maybe we could go up the stairs, climb, go to the top, and maybe we could visit at nighttime, and someone who works and stays at the ziggurat and studies the stars and planets could guide us. It'd be like going to a planetarium. We'd look up at the sky, and they could tell us about the movement of the stars and planets. In fact, they looked at the planets, they called them wandering stars, and tried to use the movement of the planets to predict what would happen. And there's another thing that we still practice today, and it started in Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, and that's our 7-day week. So in the land between the rivers, let me get my map again. The people who settled here over 3,000 years ago and lived and farmed on the land between the Tigris and Euphrates River, they started our 7-day week, and each day of the week was named for a heavenly body, something in the sky. So Sunday was named for the sun, and Monday was named for the moon, and the rest of the days of the week were named for different planets. So let's see, we went to Mesopotamia, we learned about writing, and their writing was on cuneiform, and we learned about ziggurats. and we learned about the days of the week. Now, the cuneiform writing was important for another reason. It was used to record agreements, and it was used to record laws. And laws are really another form of agreement. We agree to live by certain laws, and if we don't, then maybe we'll have a consequence. So in Mesopotamia, there was a king named Hammurabi, and he was tired of people trying to change the laws whenever they wanted to. So he had people use cuneiform to carve the law into stone, into rock, not clay. So it'd be very permanent and last a long time. And so people would remember those laws. And that's called the Code of Hammurabi. He had 282 laws that he listed, and he also listed the consequence or penalty that you would have to pay if you didn't follow the laws. And the Code of Hammurabi was posted where people could see it. And not everyone could read, but they could ask, and people who had studied could tell them what those laws were. And I was thinking it's not that different. We still do that today. So when you are in the car with your parents driving, you might see signs, and the signs are really traffic laws, and they remind us that we shouldn't drive faster than the posted speed limit. So this says speed limit 55. If you're driving to Zuni or Rama, you might see a sign that says speed limit 55. And so I think maybe we got that idea from Hammurabi and the people who lived between the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Thank you for listening. Thanks for visiting. See you next time.